All right, so you ready to dive in?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Awesome. Today we're doing a deep dive on, how we talk about time in English,
Lots to unpack there.
for sure.
Yeah.
And you're probably thinking, okay, I know the basics, like days of the week, months,
Right.
but have you ever thought about how, deeply time is built into how we speak? It's more than just vocab, right?
It really is. We've got idioms, we've got cultural clashes about being on time late.
Exactly, all these hidden codes. So to get to the bottom of this, we've got articles, YouTube videos, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff. It's amazing how much we just assume about time, based on our own languages. Like, even the names of the months
Oh, interesting.
can tell you so much about a culture.
Huh. Yeah, that's true. Like February is usually the shortest month, but I've never really thought about where that name even came from.
Well, get this. 45 essential words for units of time in English. It points out that February comes from this ancient Roman thing, like a purification ritual.
What?
Yeah, Febua, they called it.
Whoa, so not just some random name.
Nope. Imagine trying to get an English speaker's jokes about, say, Valentine's Day without knowing February used to be all about cleansing and atonement.
Wow. That is a heavy origin for a month that's now all about chocolate and love.
Right.
It makes you wonder if the months in, like other languages, have these whole secret meanings behind them too.
Oh, I bet they do. It's like learning a whole secret code. And speaking of codes, telling time in English, everything you need to know, this one breaks down how we express time numerically.
Okay, so like the basics there.
Yeah, so you've got your hour plus minutes format. Simple, right? 625 for 6.25.
Straightforward. Pretty sure most people learning English get that one down.
Right, but then there's this other system, minutes plus past SD or TO plus the hour, so 3:30 for 3.30. This is where some learners trip up.
Yeah, but even native speakers, right? I was reading in Time Talk this one article where someone named Alice, she always mixed up quarter to and half past.
Happens to the best of us.
Shows you, even native speakers, we have our time-telling quirks.
Part of the fun of language, right?
Totally. But yeah, going back to those numerical expressions, quarter to, half past, I can see why those get mixed up.
Oh, for sure. If you're not used to thinking of time in those chunks, like quarters, halves.
Yeah, it's not intuitive for everyone.
Exactly. Shows how the language we speak shapes how we even think about time passing. But there's more than just the clock, right? Telling time in English, that same source, it also talks about how important those little adverbs are.
Adverbs, you mean like...
Now, soon, later, all those.
Ooh, tell me about it. Those can be so tricky. Like, how soon is soon? Feels like it could be 5 minutes or 5 hours.
Right. It's not just knowing the word, but the feeling behind it, the context.
For sure. If my boss says, get me that report soon, I know it means like now, now, now.
Yeah.
But if a friend's like, let's hang out soon, that could be weeks from now.
Exactly. Different soons for different situations. And then you've got those like super casual ways to say time around 3-2-ish.
Oh yeah, those are perfect when you're just being chill. It's like saying, hey, I'm not a clock watcher. Which, speaking of going with the flow, you ever notice how differently, different cultures think about time?
Oh, totally. Pasted text really drove that point home. Western cultures like the US, UK, Germany, punctuality is huge. But in some South American, African, Middle Eastern cultures, it's way more flexible.
Like they figured out flexible time that pasted text talked about. Imagine living in a place where being a little late isn't a big deal.
It's a different world, right? Meetings that don't start exactly on time, plans can change without everyone freaking out. Makes you rethink our whole idea of time being this straight line, super rigid.
I'm already less stressed just picturing that. But I can also see how it'd lead to some funny misunderstandings, especially if you're not used to it.
Oh, for sure. You could end up waiting forever for someone who's on flexible time, or accidentally offend someone by being too on time if they value that relaxed approach.
Goes to show, even time, something that seems so universal, can be understood in totally different ways depending on where you are, what culture you're in.
Absolutely. And I've got some stories about that. Actually, let me tell you about this one time I was visiting India for this conference. And I had set up this meeting, right, with a local entrepreneur. Showed up right on time, naturally, only to find out he was still finishing breakfast.
Oh, no. Did he at least, apologize for being late?
Not even a little bit. He was super chill about it, invited me in, offered me some chai. We just chatted for a while before getting down to business.
So it wasn't a big deal at all to him. That's so different from, I don't know, New York or London.
Totally different. And it's not just India either. Pasted text, mentioned Mexico too. Flexible time over there as well. I've heard stories about meetings set for 10 a.m. that don't actually start till noon.
Wow, makes you wonder how anything gets done.
They have their systems, you know? It's
Yeah.
about adapting to a different pace. And honestly, flexible time can be pretty liberating, you know?
I bet. Takes the pressure off always having to be somewhere at the exact minute. Speaking of different paces, though, let 'em talk TV. They have this video about the present simple tense.
Yes, using it for future events.
Yeah, like when we were talking about schedules. Really messed with my head when I was first learning English. It's like the future's already baked in, you know?
It's already happening, kind of. Threw me off too at first.
Almost as if the language itself sees time differently. Not just a straight line, but everything connected.
Huh, yeah, I like that. Makes you wonder if other languages out there have grammar that shows a totally different way of understanding time, you know?
Now that's a deep dive I'd be down for. But for now, let's get back to those idioms we were talking about. Time is money. Remember that one?
How could I forget?
Pasted text brought it up, and it really does seem like a super Western, like capitalist way of looking at time.
Oh, for sure. It's all about being efficient, productive, squeezing every minute. But other cultures might have idioms that are more about patience, like good things come to those who wait, or something along those lines.
Makes sense. Different cultures, different values, different ways of saying those same things about time. It's like each language has its own time language, right?
I love that time language. And by learning those different languages, we understand not just the words, but the people and cultures behind them.
Okay, I'm officially inspired to brush up on my English idioms now. Any favorites you want to share? Maybe ones that are super tricky or just funny.
Oh, so many to choose from. In the nick of time always gets me. Paints such a vivid picture, you know.
It does, like you're racing against the clock and barely making it.
Yeah.
Any idioms like that in your native language?
We do. We have one that translates to, like, catching the train by the hair. Same idea.
That's hilarious. Amazing how different the words can be, but the meaning's the same. Like peeking into a different culture's imagination, you know?
It is. And those glimpses can be super insightful. Teach us about more than just language, but different ways of seeing the world.
Okay, after all this talk about idioms and cultures, I'm ready to get, practical. Pasted text had those examples of politely scheduling meetings and stuff in English.
Yeah, those are essential. Phrases like, what time works for you? Or, let's aim for 3 p.m.
I like how those sound professional but still friendly, you know? But what about when you got to cancel or reschedule? Those conversations are always a bit awkward, even in my own language.
Basic text header back there, too. Remember those suggestions like, I'm so sorry, but I need to reschedule our meeting, or would it be possible to move this to later? It's about being respectful of their time, but also showing you're flexible.
Those are good, stealing those. But with friends, it's more casual, right? Like around 3 or whenever you're free.
Definitely. With friends and family, it's more about the connection, less about the exact time on the clock. Speaking of which, AM, PM, that system's kind of weird, isn't it?
Wait, yeah. Never really thought about it that way. Seems so normal to us, but it is different from how other languages do it.
Right. Some cultures, they split the day into 4 6-hour chunks, not 2 12-hour ones. And then there's the 24-hour clock.
So many ways to slice up time, it's kind of mind-blowing. Makes you realize how deeply our own system gets into our heads.
For sure. Another reminder that even something as basic as time is shaped by language and culture.
Okay, we've covered, so much. Vocab, idioms, cultural clashes, even how weird AM, PM is.
Yeah.
But we haven't really talked about the future.
You're right. Good catch. But luckily, our sources had some great stuff about that, too.
Like that video, the Let Them Talk TV one, breaking down all the future tenses.
Exactly. That was so helpful for understanding the nuances, like when to use will, going to, or even present continuous to talk about future plans.
It's cool how English has all these different tools for talking about what's going to happen.
It really does. You can express your hopes, your dreams, plans.
And pasted text in those great examples, too. Like, for deadlines, we need to have this finished by next Friday. So useful.
But remember those cultural differences we talked about? Those can affect how people see the future, too.
Oh, yeah, pasted text mentioned that. Western cultures tend to be more linear, right? Big on planning, achieving goals in the future.
Whereas cultures with a more cyclical view might be more about living in the present, adapting to whatever happens.
It's like some are all about pushing ahead into the future, and others are more about going with the flow.
Love that analogy. And those different perspectives, sometimes they cause misunderstandings, especially across cultures.
Can you imagine the potential for conflict if someone who's super future-focused is working with someone who's more present-oriented?
Could be a recipe for disaster. Missed deadlines, last-minute changes, everyone getting stressed.
Shows that even when we're speaking the same language, our backgrounds can affect how we understand something as basic as time.
Absolutely. Being aware of those differences helps us communicate better, build stronger relationships, across cultures.
Okay, so we've got different ways of seeing the future, but I'm curious how that actually shows up in language itself. Like, what does that look like?
Great question. Time talks. Learning about days, months, and time periods. That one had some interesting stuff about this.
Oh, cool. What did they say?
Some languages, their grammar really emphasizes the future. Others, they blur the lines between present and future. Like some languages, they use different verbs for actions that'll happen in the future. Not just tenses, but whole different verbs.
Whoa, really? That's wild. It's like the future is built into the language itself at a deeper level.
Exactly. Makes you realize how much our perception of time is tied to the way we speak.
All right, so future tenses, cultural nuances. Oh, and we got to talk about those pesky time zones. How to tell time in English. Did a good job explaining how those work.
It did. Explained how the Earth's rotation is divided into those 24 zones and how that affects our lives.
Ugh, time zones are such a pain, especially when you're traveling or trying to set up meetings with people all over.
Oh, tell me about it. I once missed a super important conference call, international one, because I messed up the time zones.
Oh no, what happened?
I did the math wrong, called in a full 12 hours late.
Ouch, I bet your colleagues were thrilled.
Let's just say I learned my lesson about double-checking time zones the hard way. Speaking of time zone confusion, you ever dealt with jet lag?
Ugh, the worst. It's like your body's stuck in one time zone, but your mind's trying to catch up to another one.
Exactly. And it's because of our internal clock, that circadian rhythm that How to Tell Time in English mentioned.
Circadian rhythm sounds kind of scary, honestly.
It's just your body's natural sleep-wake cycle, nothing to be afraid of. But when you travel across a bunch of time zones, it gets all messed up. Takes a while to adjust.
Makes sense. So your internal clock's out of sync with, like, the actual world outside.
Exactly. The more time zones you cross, the worse it gets, which is why those long-haul flights can hit you so hard.
So basically, jet lag is just your body protesting against time travel.
Good way to put it. Speaking of messing with time, though, daylight saving time, am I right?
Oh, don't even get me started.
Eh.
It's like someone's playing tricks on reality twice a year. Can never remember which way to turn the clocks.
It is confusing. How to Tell Time in English? They explained it's about getting more daylight in summer, but it still feels so random.
Right, like, who decided this was a good idea? But we got to deal with it. And that means knowing how to talk about it in English, too.
Explaining time with embed in English, that one gives some good advice on that. Remember the difference between in the morning, at noon, and by evening?
Oh, yeah, prepositions.
Yeah.
Always tricky. But that source broke it down really well.
It did, and showed how you can use those same prepositions to talk about time zones and daylight saving, like the meeting's at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or daylight saving time begins in March.
Perfect examples. I feel way more confident talking about all this now.
Yeah.
But aside from all the technical stuff, we talk about time in so many other ways, Just everyday conversations.
Oh, for sure. Setting up appointments, making plans, it's all part of how we communicate.
And our sources hooked us up with all the phrases we need. Can I make an appointment for? Or would it be possible to reschedule? That was from How to Talk About Your Schedule and Make Appointments in English.
Yes. Perfect for sounding professional. And that same source had tips for canceling politely, too. Like, I'm so sorry, but I need to cancel my appointment. Always takes the edge off.
I always feel bad canceling, but those phrases make it so much smoother.
They do. It's all about finding the words that get your message across clearly and politely, too.
Exactly. Speaking of the right words, remember that part where they talked about the difference between an appointment and a reservation? Still tricks me up sometimes.
It is subtle.
So appointments are usually for those professional things, like doctors, lawyers, and reservations are for restaurants, hotels, stuff like that.
Right. Getting the words right makes you sound more confident, more professional.
Like we're cracking the code of English, one-time expression at a time.
That's what we're doing. And with each one, we learn more, not just about the language, but about the people and the culture behind it.
This deep dive has been amazing. We've gone from basic time telling to, like, cultural mindsets, professional talk, even time travel.
It's been quite the journey. Hope our listeners are finding it just as fascinating as we are.
Me too. Now, before we wrap up, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
how different cultures see time, especially when it comes to being on time. Pasted text has some great examples.
Totally. It showed how in a lot of Western cultures, being on time is super important, sign of respect, professionalism.
Right. While in some Eastern cultures, it's more fluid. Being a few minutes late isn't a big deal.
Exactly. And when those norms clash, things can get awkward, maybe even lead to conflict.
Imagine being late for a meeting in Germany where they're all about punctuality.
You'd never hear the end of it. But other places, it wouldn't be a big deal.
Context is everything, you know?
Oh.
Understanding those unspoken rules.
Which brings us back to flexible time. That thing pasted text talked about. Common in India, Mexico. Flexible time, yes. Where plans are more like suggestions, things happen when they happen.
To someone who's used to strict schedules, it sounds crazy, but I can see how appealing it is, too. More relaxed, spontaneous.
It really is. It challenges that Western view of time being this like precious resource you got to manage and control.
So instead of stressing about being 5 minutes late, you just go with the flow, enjoy the ride.
Exactly. Different way of living, and it can be pretty freeing.
Adding embrace flexible time to my to-do list. But we can't forget how important it is to be aware of those cultural differences, especially when we're talking to people from different backgrounds.
Couldn't agree more. Communication is key. Understanding those nuances helps us connect better, avoid unnecessary arguments.
Because in the end, it's not about being right or wrong, but respecting those different ways of thinking about time.
Perfectly put. Now let's switch gears for a second, talk about those amazing time idioms again. Time flies, time heals all wounds. Those are classics.
Pasted text was full of them. It's crazy how those few words can say so much about life, about being human.
They really do, and they often reflect a culture's values, you know.
Like time is money, that's all about productivity, efficiency. Very Western.
But then you have better late than never, which is more about forgiveness, second chances.
Each idiom's like a window into a culture's soul, almost.
I like that. And understanding those idioms, it helps us appreciate how rich and complex language is.
I kind of want to start collecting time idioms from different languages now, like a linguistic scavenger hunt.
That's such a cool idea. Great way to learn about cultures and how people think, all through their idioms.
Okay, so idioms, cultural stuff, practical tips, but we got to address the elephant in the room. Time in books, movies, music.
Yes. Pasted text gave us some great examples of how time can be this powerful storytelling tool.
One of my favorites is The Ticking Clock. You know those suspenseful stories where the characters are racing against time to, like, solve a mystery or something?
Creates so much tension, classic move. And then there's time travel, which lets writers explore all these what-if scenarios, play with different timelines, really makes you think about time and free will, all that deep stuff.
Time travel stories always mess with my head. And we can't forget the classic metaphor, the sands of time, is like this image of time steadily flowing by. You can't stop it.
Powerful stuff. And pasted text even had examples for music. Song titles like Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper or If I Had Time by the Rolling Stones.
It's incredible how music can capture those feelings about time so well, you know, makes you feel it.
It does. And by understanding how time is used in art, whether it's books, movies, music, we appreciate it even more, and we understand the human experience better, too.
This deep dive into how we talk about time in English has been so eye-opening. We've gone from, like, telling time 101 to cultural differences, professional idioms, even time travel.
What a ride. Hopefully our listeners are coming away with a better understanding of how to talk about time in English, but also how it affects how we think, how we act, even how we see the world.
Okay, before we wrap things up completely, there's one more piece of the puzzle. Knowing when to be formal, when to be casual. Pasted text had good advice for that.
Absolutely. Choosing the right tone based on who you're talking to, the situation, super important.
Like if you're writing a business email, you probably say something like, at your earliest convenience, or as soon as possible. Formal, but still polite.
Right. But if you're texting a friend, it's more like around 3 or whenever you're free. Much more casual.
Matching your language to the moment. That's the key. And understanding those little differences helps make sure you're always clear and respectful, no matter who you're talking to.
Exactly. So as we wrap things up, let's recap some of those practical tips for mastering time talk in English.
Good idea. First, start with the basics. Days, months, seasons. 45 essential words for units of time in English. That's a good place to start.
For sure. Then, the different ways to say the time numerically. And those little adverbs now, soon, later, small words. big impact.
Once you got those down, start exploring those idioms and metaphors, the ones that make your English more colorful, more interesting.
Love it. But the biggest tip, pay attention. The way we talk about time, it changes depending on the situation, the culture, who you're with.
Be a good listener, ask questions if you're not sure, and be flexible. Most importantly, have fun. Learning a language is an adventure, and figuring out all the time stuff, that's just part of the fun.
Well said.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, I'm honestly feeling inspired to keep learning, keep discovering all these cool ways to talk about time in English. It's like we've cracked a secret code for understanding one of the most basic parts of being human.
It really is a secret code. And the more you learn, the more you understand about English itself.
Okay, last question for you. After all this amazing info, going from like basic vocab to the cultural soul of time in English, what's one question our listeners should walk away with? Something to really get them thinking.
Here's one. If you could time travel, where would you go and why? What is it about the past or the future that really grabs you?
Ooh, that's a good one. Makes you think about how much our fascination with time goes beyond just the practical stuff, you know? It's about dreams, curiosity, what could have been, what might be. Makes you realize how much our fascination with time goes beyond just the practical stuff, you know? It's about dreams, curiosity, what could have been, what might be.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe someday we'll actually figure out time travel. But until then, we've got language, right? It can take us to different cultures, different times.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So to everyone listening, keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep those questions coming. We'll see you on our next deep dive.